Welcome back to Get Down to Business, the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. I've got a treat in store for you. I've got Dr. Brad McLean, who's the founder of Designing Transformative Experiences, LLC. He's a social scientist interested in the nature and psychology of identity development, learning, and leadership, with over 20 years of experience working with organizations and leaders of all stripes. I could go on and on with his bio, which is quite fascinating because he actually has worked at NASA in the Space Shuttle program. We'll dive deeper into that. Brad, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
It's great to talk to you. Motivating people. I know that's something you're super passionate about. And in fact, you've written a book, Designing Transformative Experiences, a toolkit for leaders, trainers, teachers, and other experienced designers, which I know is somewhat formed based on your past experiences. So Brad, I always love to get to know the person behind the microphone. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm in the business of identity, so I wear lots of different identity hats. The first and foremost one is that I'm a faculty member, a social scientist, like you said, at the University of Colorado in Boulder. I'm also the director of corporate research at the National Center for Women in IT, where I get to work with tech companies and fintech companies, large and small, all the ones you've heard of and the little ones you never heard of and everybody in between, on this challenge of leadership in a time of rapid change. And it's been my pleasure and great interest to bring a new view of leadership through social science research to those audiences. I also work for the Jane Goodall Institute and have done for over 20 years. And that is something that has shaped one of my many identities and just been inspired by the leadership that I've seen from Jane and the wonderful people who work with her. Of course, we all bring all these different identities from our past with us, but those are the things that keep me busy these days.
That's wild. Okay, so your amazing book, Designing Transformative Experiences, a toolkit for leaders, trainers, teachers, and other experienced designers, I know is out this month, which is awesome. And in the book, again, more of a toolkit than a book, readers can dramatically increase their capacity to design and deliver experiences that change lives. But Brad, it's interesting. I know you are a big fan of Elvis, but not in the classic sense. Tell us a little bit about the Elvis framework, which I know is mentioned in the book.
Framework. Absolutely. It is a book. It's a toolkit. It's a lot of things. The book has many identities. But yes, I figured, academic frameworks and being a creature of NASA back in the day, I was surrounded by acronyms and I hated it. And, I figured if you're going to have an acronym, you might as well have one that's memorable. So when I saw the opportunity to fit this to Elvis, the king, I was very inspired. So Elvis is the framework, the academic framework for this social science. It stands for Experiential Learning Variables and Indicators System. So experiential learning is at the root of this. This new view of leadership is called experience design leadership, and it asks leaders to recast themselves as experience designers. We're all familiar with command and control style leadership, or even service leadership, or even some of us with transformational leadership. But in all those cases, leaders in the corporate or educational space, they're trying to do, the usual things: deadlines, budgets, quarterly revenue numbers, hiring and promotions, all those things that are so important and indeed are important. But what happens if we recast ourselves as leaders, as designers of experiences for ourselves and our teams? Suddenly, a whole new toolkit, a whole new toolbox of social psychology opens up for us to see our roles differently. Elvis articulates that. It says your team isn't just a group of people, it's an experience, and you are the lead designer of that experience. And not only a run-of-the-mill experience, it's a learning experience if you are a skilled designer, if you are a skilled leader. And that's Elvis in a nutshell.
Well, it's great that you're breaking this down, Brad, to again learn from the lessons, which we'll talk about again in a moment, from some of these other programs, some really cool programs like the Space Shuttle program, and again collaborating with Jane Goodall for over 15 years on her world conservation efforts. But you're bringing it down to a level that certainly every business owner, every leader in general, trainers, teachers, and other folks can benefit from. I like to keep this really, really practical for our listeners. Entrepreneurs, small business owners, what is the lesson, the key takeaway, without sharing all the secrets, from designing transformative experiences that you want folks to walk away with and that they can potentially even put into practice in the week ahead?
Oh, yeah. And that's the real key question, right? If you cast yourself as an experienced designer, and the research tells us, the social science of Elvis tells us, at the end of the day, whatever experience we have, designed or not, we will translate into a narrative. We're hardwired for this cognitively. Even this podcast today, both of us, we will go away and tell our friends and colleagues about this conversation we had. We'll tell a story about it. Yours will be a little different than mine, but they'll still be around the same event. So the question for leaders who say, yes, I'm going to be an Elvis experienced design leader today, I am going to ask myself, what is the narrative I want my team to generate from the experience that I've helped design? And of course, we co-create these experiences. It's not like I impose it on somebody as a designer. I invite them to it. I invite them to a conversation where we co-create an experience. Well, what is that narrative at the end of the day, and how can I shape it? If we're successful, the narratives that people generate from the leadership experiences we create are powerful. If they're powerful enough, they inform our most prized possession, our identity narratives. That is, those experiences, the narratives we generate, change our sense of self in some important way. And that can ripple through our work. It can ripple through our lives. And with my research, the hundreds of people that I've worked with, it ripples through their lives for years and years to come. It's one of those threshold moments or experiences where nothing is the same afterwards. And that's what we call a transformative experience, why the book is called Designing Transformative Experiences. It's kind of the holy grail for experienced design leaders, if you will. That's the take home.
Speaking of transformative experiences, again, I'm chatting with Dr. Brad McLean, the founder of Designing Transformative Experiences, which is also the name of his new book. Brad, what are some of those experiences that have shaped you from again, working at NASA and some of the other fantastic organizations that you've joined? What are some of those experiences and some of those key takeaways that really molded you into writing a book? Is not an easy feat. I know that.
Yeah, this one was coming for 20 years, and it was a bunch of chapters and papers and things before it was a book. But, the formative thing that told me I was interested in transformative experience was actually a tragedy, but it turned out to be an inspiring one. When I worked on the Space Shuttle program, my mission was the last Space Shuttle mission of the Space Shuttle Columbia, which, as we all know, was the second Space Shuttle disaster. I had the great pleasure of working with that crew for several years before they went up, and they were delayed for several years, so they existed together as a crew, and tight bonds, and so inspiring. But of course, when the shuttle exploded on re-entry, they were all killed, and I became lost in a dark year of depression. However, going through that, working through that depression, and seeing their example of dedicating and ultimately giving their lives to something they believed in, something that could potentially transform our human future, that is what inspired them. And I had to ask myself, what is inspiring me? What is it that I will give my life for in contribution to this world? And I thought, I'm not going to be an astronaut, but I am going to be a social scientist who gets into this question in education, learning, and leadership. How do transformations happen? The Space Shuttle accident transformed, but also inspired me in this direction. How did that work? How cognitively, emotionally, and from a social science view does that work? And how can we use that knowledge, if we could understand it, as a new way to lead, not just teams and companies, but also our own lives and families and parenting? Wherever mentor and protege relationships exist, how can we make the most of those kinds of experiences? And that was the most critical experience I had. Now, the stuff with Jane Goodall and the other amazing leaders at big, huge companies and small companies alike that I've had the pleasure of working with has only inspired me and taught me further. In many ways, I feel like the student, but I'm so grateful to share what I've learned in the form of this book.
Brad, glad you're sharing it with us, and again, bring it to entrepreneurs, small business owners, like many of those that are listening. Brad, how can we find a copy of again, how we can design and lead our own transformative experiences?
Well, first of all, we've got the book and all the services we offer at designingtransformativeexperiences.com, as well as wherever books are sold. So you've got your Barnes & Noble and your Amazon as well. So that's the good place to start. If anybody's interested in chatting more, they can always drop me a line through that website. Again, designingtransformativeexperiences.com. We're a small shop, so I read all the emails.
Fantastic. Yeah. Brad, really appreciate you joining us. Again, designingtransformativeexperiences.com. The book is out. And quick break here on the show, all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. We'll be right back.